In the United States of America, it's often common to turn criminals into folk heroes. People like Jesse James or Bonnie and Clyde come to mind immediately. People who do things others would never dream of doing, and it becomes the stuff of legend. But what about one man who did something so unthinkable for that cash money that it makes the entire world wonder?
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
It is one of the most known unsolved cases in American history. Since the crime was committed, hundreds of thousands of people have looked into what exactly happened during the event and just what in the world happened after. Law enforcement have been stumped for decades, and civilians have submitted theory after theory. The details of that fateful day are well known, but the aftermath is where many would say the story truly begins. It's inspired multiple episodes of television, podcasts, nonfiction, and fiction books, and just about every form of popular media. Tonight, we take a look at one of the most widely known, researched, famous, and baffling cases in American crime history: the hijacking of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 and the mystery of D.B. Cooper, right after this. On November 24, 1971, Flight 305 of Northwest Orient Airlines departed from Portland International Airport at 2:50 p.m. Its destination was Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Among the 37 passengers was a man later described as being in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a dark business suit with a white shirt, a thin black tie, black raincoat, and brown shoes. All he brought on board with him was a black suitcase and a paper bag. Shortly into the flight, this seemingly average man passed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. At first, Schaffner passed it off as just some guy who was away on business trying to pick up a girl. But after she didn't answer and dropped the note into her bag, the passenger turned to her and said, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." It was then that Schaffner retrieved the note from her purse and read it, stating that the man had a bomb and wanted her to sit next to him. She obliged. Once seated next to the man, Schaffner asked to see the bomb. The man opened up his briefcase and revealed 2 rows of 4 red cylinders. Attached to the cylinders were a wire and a large cylindrical battery. Afterwards, he closed the briefcase and told the attendant his demands, which she promptly copied onto paper and delivered to the captain in the cockpit. The captain, William A. Scott, directed Schaffner to stay in the cockpit and write down everything that happened from that point on. From there, Scott radioed Northwest Flight Operations and informed them of the hijackers' demands. Quote, $200,000 in a knapsack by 5 p.m. He wants 2 front parachutes, 2 back parachutes. He wants the money in negotiable American currency. In addition, the passengers would later request that upon landing in Seattle, the fuel trucks must meet the plane and all passengers must remain seated while the money was brought aboard. Then he would release the passengers after he had the money. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. Scott then proceeded to inform the Seattle-Tacoma Airport's air traffic control, who then contacted local police and the FBI. While Scott handled everything communication-wise and continued to fly the aircraft, flight attendant Tina Mucklow stayed by the hijacker's side. She would later state that during the flight he appeared to be familiar with the area he could see from his window, and that he came off as nice as opposed to cruel or aggressive, and also didn't appear nervous at all. When Mucklow asked him why he had selected Northwest Airlines, he replied with a laugh and said, quote, It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge, and that Northwest suited his needs best. At around 5:24 p.m., Captain Scott was informed that the authorities had gathered everything the hijacker requested and were ready for the plane to land. The captain informed the mysterious passenger and the plane landed at 5:46 p.m. From there, the hijacker directed Mucklow to be the one to go retrieve the money from law enforcement and bring it back to him. Once he had his money, the hijacker began to let the passengers go. Afterward, he instructed Mucklow to retrieve the 3 parachutes and bring them to him at the rear of the plane. When he had all of his money and other requested materials, and the plane finished refueling, the hijacker gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives: a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, approximately 100 knots, at a maximum of 10,000 feet altitude. The hijacker also specified the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps must be lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin must remain unpressurized. The first officer, William J. Radizak, informed the man that this configuration limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, so a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. The hijacker and the crew discussed options and agreed on Reno Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. The hijacker further directed the aircraft to take off with the rear exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest's home office objected that this was unsafe. The hijacker countered, saying, "It can be done, do it," but did not argue the point and said he would lower the staircase once they were airborne. He demanded Mucklow remain aboard to assist the operation. At about 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off with only the hijacker, Mucklow, Captain Scott, First Officer Radizak, and the flight engineer Harold E. Anderson aboard. Shortly after takeoff, the man instructed Mucklow to lower the aft staircase, an act she was hesitant to perform out of fear of being sucked out of the aircraft. Eventually, he instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the curtain partition between the coach and first-class sections, and not return, and that he would lower them himself. Before leaving, Mucklow asked him to take the bomb with him, to which he said he would either take it or disarm it. As he walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw the hijacker standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the aft staircase had been deployed. The pilot used the cabin intercom to ask the hijacker if he needed assistance, but Cooper's last message was a one-word reply: no. The crew's ears popped from the drop in cabin pressure from the stairs being opened. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. In his interview with the FBI, co-pilot Bill Radizak said the sudden upward pitch occurred while the flight was near the suburbs north of Portland. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, unsure if the hijacker was still aboard. Mucklow used the cabin intercom to inform the hijacker they were approaching Reno and he needed to raise the stairs so the plane could land safely. She repeated her requests as the pilots made the final approach to land, but neither Mucklow nor the flight crew received a reply from the hijacker. At 11:02 p.m., with the aft staircase still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft, but fearing the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, did not approach the plane. Captain Scott searched the cabin, confirmed the hijacker was no longer aboard, and after a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. After the events of the hijacking, the FBI began its investigation into who was behind the crime and where he was. This, of course, assuming that he had survived his jump at all. During their search for evidence, they were able to find several items they deemed relevant to the case. black clip-on tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and had 3 shroud lines cut from the canopy, a hair from Cooper's headrest, and 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray. FBI agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno and developed a series of composite sketches. Local police and FBI agents immediately began questioning possible suspects, acting on the possibility the hijacker may have used his real name, or the same alias in a previous crime. Portland police discovered and interviewed a Portland citizen named D.B. Cooper. The Portland Cooper had a minor police record but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. In his rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long confused the man with the name used by the hijacker. United States International Wire Service reported Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media sources repeated the error, the hijacker's pseudonym went from Dan Cooper to D.B. Cooper. Due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult. The jet's airspeed estimates varied, and the environmental conditions along the flight path varied as well with the aircraft's location and altitude, and only Cooper knew how long he stayed in free fall before pulling his ripcord. The Air Force F-106 pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner, nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. Moreover, a black-clad individual jumping into the moonless night would have been difficult to see, to say the least, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover, and lack of ground lighting. The T-33 pilots did not make visual contact with the 727. On December 6, 1971, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of an Air Force SR-71 Blackbird to retrace and photograph Flight 305's flight plan and attempt to locate the items Cooper carried during his jump. The SR-71 made 5 flights to retrace Flight 305's route, but due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. In an experimental recreation flying the same aircraft used in the hijacking in the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound sled out of the open air stair and were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section and brief change in cabin pressure described by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial extrapolations placed Cooper's landing zone within an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts focused on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the heavily wooded terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also carried out. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Cooper nor any of the equipment he presumably carried was found. Using fixed-winged aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path from Seattle to Reno. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Shortly after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided by some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March, and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. 2 local women stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County. It was later identified as the remains of Barbara Ann Derry, a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks before. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated to be between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, the FBI concluded their original calculations were incorrect after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines and the Air Force determined Cooper probably jumped over the town of La Center, Washington. Later analysis indicated that the original landing zone estimates were indeed inaccurate. Captain Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, later determined his flight path was farther east than initially thought. Additional data from a variety of sources, in particular Continental Airlines pilot Tom Bohan, who was flying 4 minutes behind Flight 305, indicated the wind direction factored into drop zone calculations had been wrong, possibly by as much as 80 degrees. This and other supplemental data suggested the actual drop zone was south-southeast of the original estimate, in the drainage area of the Washougal River. On July 8, 2016, the FBI announced active investigation of the Cooper case was suspended, citing the need to focus investigative resources and manpower on issues of higher and more urgent priority. Local field offices would continue to accept any legitimate physical evidence related specifically to the parachutes or to the ransom money that may emerge in the future. The 66-volume case file compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation would be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on the FBI's website. All of the evidence is open to the public. In 2019, the FBI released a report indicating that about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, a burglary was reported at a small grocery store near Hyson, Washington, an unincorporated community located within the calculated drop zone that Northwest Airlines presented to the FBI. The burglar was noted by the FBI to have taken only survival items such as beef jerky and gloves. This crime remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. With a case that has as many unanswered questions as this, theories are plentiful as to who D.B. Cooper is and where he resides. Some speculators claim he is actually a she. There are those who think Cooper is alive and well, died almost immediately, or lived and died a non-spectacular death. But when it's all said and done, it's that mystery and intrigue in this case that makes it so appealing to those interested in unsolved mysteries. From fiction and non-fiction literature, films, television episodes, and many other art forms, Cooper's legacy will never be forgotten, extending to the impact his crime had on aviation security as a whole. There's even an annual D.B. Cooper convention. No matter how you look at it, the hijacking of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 and the mystery surrounding the person only known as D.B. Cooper will arguably remain the most known and popular unsolved crime of all time. This one is a story that's captured my imagination since I was a little boy in the 90s. I remember learning about D.B. Cooper on Unsolved Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries, of course, for any 90s kid is the ultimate in spooky and kooky stories. And I always wondered, how did he get away with it? I mean, did he just die horribly and his body was impossible to find? Did he end up taking a piggyback ride on Bigfoot? Bigfoot is pretty hard to find himself. Or did he simply hike into the woods and hike out like so many other people have and go on with his life? There are a lot of popular suspects, people that a lot of others think definitely are D.B. Cooper, but none of them have ever faced scrutiny. None of them have ever been proven to be the man, the myth himself. But what do you think? Do you think D.B. Cooper is alive and well? Do you think he lived a long life and died of natural causes, or do you think he just plain got shish kebabbed on one of the many, many great redwoods of the Pacific Northwest? I really don't know. But I would love to find out, even though it has no effect on my day-to-day life. Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. This episode is written by Morgan Moore. It's executive produced by Rob Fields, produced by Daniel Wilder, with original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you'd like us to cover on the program, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us in a very direct way, go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can support us and allow us to keep the spooky rolling and rolling and rolling. And I want to say a big thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names at the end of the show. And they are John Kalin, Johnny Nix, Bobbletopia.com, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Brent McCullough, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time right here on Weekly Spooky and Terrifying and True.